Why does the left so often excuse and even justify violence? It is a deep-seated, poisonous tendency. I'm Rich Lowry of National Review. Now, there are a couple different expressions of this tendency. Let's examine some of them. First, this notorious statement from Democratic analyst Matthew Dowd that instantly and rightly got him canned from MSNBC. But the sentiment here is very telling. Let's take a look at this one.
And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
So the assumption here is that one side is full of the haters. And if someone does something terrible to them, well, maybe they should have had it coming, or maybe they shouldn't have been so hateful. Now, there's another expression of this tendency on the left, and it's the view that the man had it coming. Here's Taylor Lorenz on the assassination of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO.
Why would you be in such a celebratory mood about the execution of another human being? Aren't you supposed to be on the caring, sharing left where, you believe in the sanctity of life?
I do believe in the sanctity of life. And I think that's why I felt, along with so many other Americans, joy, unfortunately, because it feels like.
The idea there is that the system is so oppressive, in this case specifically the healthcare system, that any act of violence, any blow against it is justified, including cold-blooded murder, which we saw in the case of the CEO, Brian Thompson, and not just justified, but joyful, positively joyful. Then we have the argument that urban violence and riots are justified. We have a lot of leftist advocates and writers that refer to these events as an uprising, which obviously has a positive connotation. Again, a sense that there's an unjust authority that is ruling over these areas and these jurisdictions. Finally, although this doesn't exhaust the genre, we have the sympathy with anti-colonial or supposedly anti-colonial insurgents or terrorist. This is why Fidel Castro had a lot of support back in the day, why Che Guevara is still a romantic figure today, and why we saw those protests in the streets celebrating and supporting Hamas. Once again, undergirding this tendency, the idea that there's a system so oppressive and so unjust, in this case colonialism, that any act of violence up to and including horrific acts of terrorism is justified. There's also a pleasingly so-called anti-racist aspect to this. The white people are the colonialists, the brown people are the insurgents and the terrorists, and the left instinctively wants to side with the brown people. Now, that's often too simplistic. It's often, frankly, wrong, as it is in the case of Israel, which is accused of being a settler colonialist state. But this is really appealing to the left psychologically and really plays into its current obsessions. Ultimately, the source of this all goes back to the French Revolution. Now, of course, we had our own revolution, but the differences between the American and the French Revolution, that's a subject for another day. Let's just stipulate the French Revolution was more violent. It was more abstract. It was more concerned with entirely destroying the old order and building a new order on top of the rubble. This is where we get the notion, really dangerous revolutionary idea of year zero, when the world is totally made anew, or year one, as the French revolutionaries put it. And this event just continues to have a romantic appeal to the left. They think of revolutionaries putting up the barricade in French streets whenever there's violence in America. I think they think back to the storming of the Bastille anytime a mob burns down a police station. Never mind that the French Revolution resulted in blood-curdling violence. Never mind that it consumed itself. Never mind that it failed. Never mind that it resulted in a man on horseback galloping in the form of Napoleon Bonaparte, as close as you get to a modern dictator in that era in Europe. The Bolshevik Revolution had massive appeal to the left. Again, an admirable attempt to make the world anew, to move beyond the evils and the deprivations of capitalism, to build a society on a foundation of these incredible ideals like equality. The left initially was allied with the Bolsheviks, admired the Bolsheviks, held them up as an example, and then, at the very least, made excuses for them. But over time, as the monstrous crimes of the Soviets became more evident and undeniable, this revolutionary impulse, this revolutionary reflex moved from Moscow to the Third World. Third World revolutionaries become heroes to the left. They embrace the 1961 book, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. In this book, Fanon argues that, quote, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. In a preface to the book, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre declared that the wretched of the earth, quote, become men through, quote, mad fury. As one essay on the book has observed, quote, the Western bourgeoisie was fundamentally racist to Fanon, and its, quote, bourgeois ideology of equality and dignity was merely a cover for capitalist imperialist rapacity. This worldview largely provides the prism through which the left views the Vietnam War. It sympathizes with or outright supports the Viet Cong. In its fervent opposition to the war, it creates revolutionary terror groups here at home. The Symbionese Liberation Army, the Weather Underground, on and on. It's easy to forget how out of control the 1970s were in America. In 1975 alone, there were nearly 90 terrorist bombings here on our soil. What's new in this toxic stew, or at least has been augmented in it, is a couple things. One, the idea that America itself is fundamentally racist to its core. So you used to be a leftist and you might support the revolutionaries in Algeria, say, because they're resisting a French colonialist regime that is so racist and horrid. Now you believe, in effect, the same kind of regime exists here in America and needs to be resisted as well. And the left also believes more fervently than ever that it is resisting fascism here in America. It's always prided itself on its anti-fascism or supposed anti-fascism going back to the 1930s, but this tendency is stronger than ever. We have, of course, seen the rise of Antifa. The irony of Antifa, of course, is that it itself is a fascistic organization. It relies on street violence and intimidation. It dresses all in black. It clashes with the legitimate authorities. It is totalitarian in its sensibilities, yet people on the left make excuses for it. Say, oh, hasn't the United States of America always been anti-fascism? Weren't the troops who stormed the beaches of Normandy anti-fascist? Well, not like this. Not anything like this. You put this all together and you get left-wing violence. You get the excuses. You get the justifications. Riots are called mostly peaceful. Cold-blooded assassins are considered sex symbols. The victims of terrorist attacks and assassinations are told that they had it coming. And you get the likes of Tyler Robinson. He wrote the name of an old Italian anti-fascist folk song on one of his bullet casings. He wrote, "Hey, fascist, catch," on another. There's every reason to believe that he thought Charlie Kirk was a fascist. And if you think Donald Trump is a fascist, if you think Charlie Kirk is a fascist, if you think all of MAGA is fascist and working to bring a fascist dictatorship to the United States, why wouldn't you resort to violence? Why wouldn't you resort to assassination? Why wouldn't you think any means is justified to try to stop it? It's too much to hope that the left will entirely give up its centuries-long attachment to the revolutionary tradition. But to help bring us back from the precipice, the left needs to condemn universally, wholeheartedly, without reservation, all political violence. And it needs to stop slandering America. Political violence is always wrong. Revolution in a free society is wrong. We aren't on the cusp of fascism, and this is the greatest country the world has ever known. Over and out.